Hello and welcome. You are joining us live for this very special Wednesday edition of the Investor Lab, the home for passionate people seeking a life of freedom, truth, and abundance. And on today's episode, this is not financial advice.
Oh, absolutely. It is not. It is not. Happy hump day, guys. What a Wednesday.
Happy
Guys,
hump
if
day.
you are here live, say hello. Hi, Gavin. Good morning.
Hey,
Good
Gavin,
afternoon.
nice to see you.
Good afternoon. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good afternoon. Good evening. Good night.
And good evening and good night. I've never seen the Truman Show, so I was trying to quote the Truman Show. Never seen it. So
I will never let you down. It's still on our list. It's one of my favorite movies. Okay, anyway.
Yeah, it's probably one of my favorite movies too, and I've
It
just never seen
probably
it.
would be, honestly. Just come
I
on.
reckon it would be. I've only ever seen the end scene where he walks through the door. I think I was.
Don't ruin it for people, Goose.
I think I went to someone's house one time and they were watching it, and I came in just at the end when he walked through the door, and so I've seen the end, but nothing anyway.
That's a rough experience. I'm sorry that happened to you.
That's okay. Hey, Catherine, nice to see you here as well. Okay, so Sam, great to see you.
Watching from work. Good dedication, Sam. Appreciate
Good. This
you.
episode will probably make you more money than your work will anyway. So, all good. Not financial advice. Okay. So
is that the sound effects? I should clip that.
Yeah, you should clip that. Not financial advice. So on today's episode, what are we going to be talking about, Gabby? Because we're going to be talking about retirement. You're the frame. You're framing this up.
I'm the frame. I am a frame. Retirement, guys. So we put out a bit of a question in the community a couple of weeks ago, just looking for topics that you really want us to talk about, because there's a lot of things going on in the world and there's a lot of different things that we talk about on this show. But I really wanted to just get a sense of what is missing? What do you feel like you need our expertise or our insights on? One of those was a really great question that came through from David, which I'll read out in a second, but it was mainly around retirement funding through real estate. And the context with that is a lot of our community and a lot of you guys that listen to the show are property investors or are thinking about property investment. And we kind of plan out mentally okay, I'm going to spend these years building up my wealth in terms of equity, largely talking about property in this case, but also it could be any other type of asset that grows in value. So you have this growth base. What happens when I get to retirement? How do I actually use that and flip that into income that I can live off? So I just thought it'd be an interesting topic for us to talk. What was I going to say? Wax lyrical about with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, because of the nature of the topic, Gabby's very concerned about us giving financial advice, and rightly so. By the way, I'm not trying to diminish that concern. Rightly so. So let me be very forthright at the very front of this episode. This is not personal financial advice. Gabby and I are not licensed financial planners. We do not know the details of your personal financial circumstances. Everything that we talk about in this podcast episode or in this YouTube live should be considered to be edutainment type advice, where you can learn some stuff, get some ideas, and think about how to apply it to your own life. And if you're not sure, you should seek the help of a professional who can look at your personal circumstances and help you to make an informed and intelligent decision for you. So, not financial advice. So, done. Advice. Right? Great. Nice. Perfect. All right. But we are going to be talking, but I do have a lot of opinions on this kind of stuff. And so we are going to rip into it. But yeah, just remember that, a lot of them, big ones. Big, loud ones. So,
sure.
So where do you want to start with this, Gabby? Where
do I want to start? So, a bit of my outline that I've got for today is I'll just go over David's question because I think it's
perfect.
Again,
good way to start.
We'll work through what are we aiming for in terms of retirement and what does that actually mean? Because you and I just had a good chat before this, kind of reframing retirement in itself. And then there's kind of different phases in terms of investment, accumulation phase and then retirement phase. There's micro phases within that, but generally speaking, what are the differences there? And then we've got some scenarios, because again, I think this is the most fun when we do a bit of live strategizing, think through, okay, if this is a situation, how could I think through setting myself up in that situation where when I do hit retirement, whatever age that is, I have enough financial income, quote unquote, that I can live the lifestyle that I want to. And then maybe if we have time, if there's interest, Q&A at the end.
Great. Perfect. What's Dave's question?
Cool. Dave's question. So, retirement funding through real estate without selling. We will come back to that. So, I'd love your thoughts on how investors can fund retirement through real estate wealth while avoiding the need to sell and trigger capital gains tax. Could you discuss the main strategies for assessing property equity? Sorry. Could you discuss the main strategies for accessing property equity tax effectively? For example, through refinancing, loan restructures, or top ups, and how these are typically managed as part of a retirement income plan. In particular, how do Australian investors balance leverage, serviceability requirements, and interest rate risk as they transition from the accumulation phase into drawdown?
Perfect. Okay. So there are going to be a lot of different directions we need to go with this in order to accurately frame up all of the potential for how people can retire. Because, by the way, there's a lot of other questions in the community that have kind of been follow-ups from this, which have been asked really, really good things. So let's touch on David's question, but then we'll expand on this and we'll talk about all of the different ways you can think about how to transition from your current investing state into a retirement state. That's if we just zoom out a little bit, the macro question here is, how do I retire? How do I retire? Basically, that's basically the question, right? We all know that the pension is not going to serve us, and super's probably not going to do that great. So the broader macro question here is, how do I retire? Now, to address David's question first and foremost, there's a couple of key things in there. So, what are the main strategies for accessing property equity tax effectively? And how do we transition from the accumulation phase into drawdown? So it's just to keep it very, very simple. Your ability to get debt is going to be directly linked to your ability to derive an income. So the point at which you retire, unless you have other sources of income, unless you've developed some significant other income stream, that you probably, like, the easiest way to think about it is you're probably not going to have borrowing capacity, or very little borrowing capacity, very little meaningful borrowing capacity. So if you're planning to stop work, then you need to plan ahead for that. And the way that you plan ahead for that is you can do refinancing and all that kind of stuff before you retire. Now, I'll give you a quick little example. So a couple of our clients, Amanda and Will, they basically retired or semi-retired before they were even 30, just through property. We helped them to buy 6 properties. I can't remember. 5 properties.
I think it's 5. Yep.
Anyway, they totally crushed it, right? And they both basically stopped work before the age of 30, which was awesome. I personally spoke to them earlier this year and said, hey, you might want to consider selling down some of those assets because they've grown a certain amount. Maybe it's an opportune time to recycle the capital into other markets. But because they didn't work in any kind of meaningful way, they were doing sort of, part-time work because they enjoyed it, which goes into how we'll talk about how to rethink retirement anyway. They were doing work by choice, low income, inconsistent type stuff. So the ability to get the borrowing capacity required to deploy the capital effectively wasn't there, and they couldn't refinance. So they just said, okay, we're just going to hold it. So pretty simple. Now, the key here is to plan ahead. Now, let's say you've got a property portfolio, and by the way, I will keep stressing, not financial advice. These are just ideas and ways to think about it. If you are thinking about retiring, if you're planning to retire, then a very smart thing to do is, before you get to that point, is to refinance all of your properties out to the maximum duration. If the plan is to hold the properties, if the plan is to maximize the ability to tap into equity without realizing a capital gains event and all of that kind of stuff, one of the best ways to realize the equity out of the properties without, one of the primary ways, right, to access equity out of a property without a capital gains event is to refinance the equity out. Now, refinancing the equity out of a property has a carrying cost of an interest rate on the loan. But if you have a portfolio of 4, 5, 6, 7 properties, and you're not ready to sell them down or anything like that, but you want to access the equity and you still have borrowing capacity, then what you can do is you can, to the maximum capability of your ability to refinance those loans back out to the maximum duration, so back out to 30 years. That's going to reduce the monthly payments because you're going to be spreading them over a longer time horizon. Refinance the equity out and park the capital into an offset account. So that way you don't have the carrying cost of the capital just burning away. You're sitting it into an offset account that's going to be offsetting the interest payments on that debt over time. So that's one way that you can unlock the equity in your portfolio and then you can slowly spend that down. Now, it doesn't take a genius to work out that eventually you're going to spend that equity down. As you're spending that equity, which is sitting in an offset account, as you're spending that down, your interest expense is creeping up. That would also then start to speed up the rate at which you're working through the capital that's sitting in an offset account. And eventually you'll use all that capital, and then you're still going to get to a position where you're like, okay, well, what do I do? I've got all these properties. Now, those properties are probably grown in value by that point. So then you would start to think about strategically selling down some of those assets over time, unless they are producing enough income for you to hold them. So one of the big objectives for most property investors is to build a property portfolio that gives them a reliable residual income stream, and that's definitely doable. And there's a few ways to get there. You can either buy heaps of properties, because there's people out there that have bought 100 plus properties or 50 or more properties. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is to go through an accumulation phase. So the first phase of your portfolio is to accelerate your capital as much as possible, build as much wealth, leverage, use every trick in the book to expand your capital base as much as possible. Try and really grow the net capital value in your portfolio. And then once you're ready to consolidate your portfolio, you can sell down some of the assets, rotate that capital into higher yielding assets, but potentially with lower LVR, and then live off the income that comes off of that. Now, a simple way to think about this, and I know if you want me to slow down, I'll go back to any kind of like specific points. Just let me know, Gabby. Just jump in. But a very simple way to think about this is if you let's say you built up $2 million of equity, let's say after selling down assets, you had $2 million of capital to deploy, and you bought 4 $500,000 properties with a 6% yield. Now, if you're buying debt free, depending on which state you're in and depending on the specific costs of the property, is it a unit that has strata? What are the insurance costs, all that kind of stuff. Your net cash flow is going to be roughly 1 to 1.5% less than your gross yield. So, for example, if you've got a $500,000 property that's got a gross rental yield of 6%, then your net rental yield is going to be something like 4.5 to 5%. Now, let's just say that it's 5%. So, if you had if you had a $500,000 property with a 5% net yield, that's going to be $25,000. If you've got 4 of those, that's going to give you $100,000 passive income. So you can have 4 properties worth $2 million that you own outright that give you $100,000 passive income. Now, the income will go up over time. You've also got to consider, that's net income. So that also takes into consideration the maintenance allowance and all of that kind of stuff as well, theoretically. So that income will go up over time. Maybe it's going to go up by between 3 and 7% a year, depending on where you bought and what the rental growth rates are in those areas. But then that income will increase over time. So it might start out as $100,000 and then increase to 105, and then 110, and then 115, and then 120, and slowly your income will go up over time. Now, will that go up as fast as monetary inflation or anything like that? Probably not. But it's a really good way to derive an income. Now, but just this before we kind of go into all the other different ways of doing it, I just want to go back to David's question. So the first part was, could you discuss the main strategies for accessing property equity tax effectively, for example, through refinancing, loan restructures, or top-up loans? I covered that out, which is basically like before you stop having a serviceable income, refinance, extend the loans to the maximum duration. Again, not financial advice, but this is what I would do. And then refinance as much equity out as possible and put that into an offset account. Use that as your cash buffer. That's going to extend that out. Now, a second piece in this consideration is the usage of trusts. Again, not financial advice. We can get in trouble for talking about trust, which is just ridiculous. But anyway, here we are. So using a discretionary trust, sometimes known as a family trust, you can have multiple beneficiaries that own. So you as an individual don't own the property, for example. So we might have the Goose and Gabby company that own a property, and then we retire and we want to be able to pass it on to our kids or something like that. So we can keep that property and transfer the beneficial ownership over to somebody else by changing the beneficial owners at the company level or at the trust level, right? So you have the ability to move assets between the family. And so, and again, I sometimes worry that I'm going to get in trouble for some of the things that I say, but I think, but one of the things that frustrates me is that we live in a world where people are too scared to say things that, or too scared to explore ideas for fear that they're going to get in trouble. So one way you can think about doing this is, let's say that you have got let's say you've got a property that's got $2 million of equity in it. Let's just say you've got a property that's got $1 million of available equity in it, right? But you don't want to sell the property, but you've retired and you don't have any income, but it's bought in a trust. And then you've got two kids, right? Or you got some kids, or you've got whatever. You transfer if you make them the beneficial owners of the trust, and if they have $1 million of borrowing capacity, they could refinance the equity out. They become the effective beneficial owners of the asset. If they have the borrowing capacity, and then potentially you may need to stop being a beneficiary. I don't know the complexities of that. You need to speak to an accountant. You may need to stop being a beneficiary on that trust. But if you transferred the beneficial ownership to them and they had the borrowing capacity, maybe they could leverage the equity out of it. And then you've tapped out more of the equity out of the property. And then, what you do with that is beyond my scope, right, at that point. But there are other ways to think about it, right? Because you don't necessarily want to have to sell the asset. Maybe you want to be able to pass the asset to somebody else who can then leverage that capital in a way that makes sense as well. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. I'm just letting you go. Okay, that was a lot. It's great. I'm just thinking through because I think what's really interesting with this is we're all kind of aware of it, but we go through phases throughout the portfolio journey. So you kind of touched on it about like accumulation versus retirement. And I think we almost literally think of the inverse. Like when we're in this phase of accumulating, again, could be property, could be anything, but just like building our wealth base, the focus is building that base, right? Building the foundation that will grow.
Yep.
And we kind of, to some degree, sacrifice cash flow in an excessive format, right? The primary function of cash flow in the early days is like maintaining your borrowing capacity versus like generating cash for you to live off. It's generally a smarter move to keep that invested into assets that will continue to grow, and focusing that earlier in your portfolio. Flip that and inverse it to the opposite end of the timeline, and we're moving more towards this phase of like, okay, we've got a bunch of growth now, we need to transition that into cash flowing assets. How do you think about actually debt in relation to this? Because like we kind of touched on it yesterday in terms of your recommendation being paying down debt as you're approaching retirement is more important at that phase versus like in the accumulation phase. In the accumulation phase, you can focus more on interest only and less P&I payments. And
Well, let me qualify that, because paying down debt makes it seem like what I'm saying is take your available income and use it to make principal payments to pay down debts. That is absolutely not what I'm saying. Again, not financial advice, but principal and interest payments are stupid, right? Like they are like one of the least effective ways to use your capital that exists on the face of the planet. So the way that I think about principal payments on a loan is, let's say your interest rate is 6%. 6%. It doesn't matter, right? Let's say the interest rate on your principal and interest loan is 6%. When you're making the principal payments, you are paying down the debt, which has a carrying cost of 6%. And so your effective rate of return on that principal payment is 6%. Now, the question you've got to ask yourself is, can you actually get a better than 6% return by deploying that capital somewhere else? And if you don't know how to get a better than 6% return, keep listening to this episode and listen to all the other episodes, because there's a million ways to get
We know
better.
We know Guy.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, come on, you can fall over and make better than 6%. So, we should actually anyway. So, when I say pay down the debt, I don't mean I have a very non-conventional view to wealth creation. The conventional view to wealth creation is, be really frugal and, have a 40-year time horizon and, dollar cost average into really stable assets and don't take any risk and buy dividend stocks and buy index funds. And, maybe in 40 years time, you'll have enough retirement income to be able to buy yourself an extra Mars bar on the weekend. And what a wonderful life you'll have. That sounds like shit to me, to be honest. Right. So look, and that's just my point of view. I think it's a fundamentally broken system. Now, the way that I think about it is, how do you intelligently deploy capital to get the maximum or the best risk-adjusted return? You don't want to take unnecessary risk. You want to maximize your return so you can move as fast as possible to your goal without taking an excessive amount of risk. And then you want to work out how to continue to redeploy that capital in line with your specific goals and objectives. So in the first phase of any portfolio, it is, how do you grow the pie as big as possible? Now, the way to think about this is, if you've got $1,000 and you get a 10% return on $1,000, what's that? $100. Oh, yay. How wonderful. That's very exciting, isn't it? If you have $10 million and you get a 10% return on $10 million, how much are you getting? $1 million. Oh, that's a bit more interesting. So the question isn't how do you invest pennies and slowly grind your way up. The question is, how quickly can you accelerate your capital? And so, as Peter has put in the chat here, debt and leverage, baby, 100% agree. Now, you got to use that carefully. I don't deploy leverage on volatile liquid assets, right? I don't because it's risky, because that's too much risk exposure for my taste. I don't debt on margin loans on equities and margin loans on crypto and stuff like that. That's far beyond that's beyond my stomach. Basically, I can't handle that level of risk. So I actually don't like a lot of risk, right? But with real estate, the risk profile is really low. And so in the first instance, what you want to do is you want to focus not on cash flow. You want to focus on, how do you grow your capital as quickly as possible? And the function of cash flow, or which includes your income or anything, is to service the maximum capability of your portfolio to grow. So if you want to get to $100,000 cash flow, it's not a case of trying to stack to buy a property that produces $1,000 of cash flow a year, and then, or buy a property that produces $5,000 of positive cash flow a year, and then just go buy 20 of them. You don't start with that. What you do is you start with, how do you maximize your capital? How do you turn $100,000 into $1 million? How do you turn $1 million into $4 million? How do you turn $4 million into $8 million? Because if you can get to broadly $2 million of net assets, then you're in a position to be able to generate $100,000 ish of income. Now, that may or may not be enough, and everyone's goals are different. So, back to your point about paying down debt, the way that I think about it in a kind of, this is kind of the classic way to think about building a property portfolio, is phase one is your expansion or your accumulation phase. Call it whatever you want, right? The number one goal is build your footprint, build your wealth, expand the capital base. That's the number one objective. And you should deploy every strategy that you can think of in order to do that. So whether that's using things like trust structures, or maximizing, or, and sometimes, so by the way, sometimes you actually need to have a lower LVR in order to get a higher borrowing capacity, right? So it's really about playing the game of finance, playing the game, all of this kind of stuff to maximize that capability. Then, when you're approaching a point that you no longer want to work and you don't want to continue to grow that pie, because let's say that you've grown that pie to 2 million. Let's say you're 25 years old and you start investing, right? And you start with $150,000, and then you turn that $150,000 into $2 million, right, in capital, in net equity. Well, maybe you're not ready to retire. So maybe you want to turn that 2 million into 5 million, and maybe you want to turn that 5 million into 10 million. Fine. Let's say that you're 60 and you've hit $2 million of net equity. You may actually want to then go, I'm not sure that I want to keep chasing bigger and bigger. I want to know, what do I do now to rotate that capital? That's when you go into a consolidation phase. And then what you can do is you can sell down some of the assets that you own. And maybe you own 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 properties, whatever you own. Sell down some of those assets, take that residual capital, and then either do one of two things, depending on the assets you own. Either pay down the debt on some of the properties you already own, if they are the assets that you want to keep, i.e., are they going to produce the right income for you? Because you may have an awesome property in Melbourne that yields at 2%. Okay, maybe that's not going to give you the income profile that you need and want for your retirement. So maybe, even if it's a good asset, maybe you're still going to sell that property down as well. So you've either got to decide to rotate the capital into existing assets and lower the LVR to the point where the cash flow supports your needs, or rotate into new assets with a higher yield, so that you can get the cash flow needs. Now, new assets with a higher yield can be anything from unit blocks to units to high yielding houses or anything like that. And maybe, and the specific objective moves from growth to cash flow. So rather than trying to work out, okay, how do I get the maximum amount of growth? You may be satisfied to buy something that has an 8 or 9% yield if you're satisfied that there'll be consistent rental demand, even if you don't believe there's going to be a lot of growth, because that might give you the cash flow that you need. So when I say pay down debt, it's really about using the portfolio's capital to pay down debt in a lump sum, not make additional principal repayments.
Yep, got it. Yeah, because I was just going to say you can't you can't argue with me that there's no, like, if you get to this retirement phase, if you had a $1 million property and you owed 900 grand on it, versus if you had a $1 million property and you owed 200 grand on it, the cash
Yep.
flow would be better if you had a lower debt level.
You're correct. Yeah.
So but how you get there is different to just paying principal and interest.
Oh, totally. So let's play this
Yeah.
out in two different scenarios. So let's say over 10 years, let's say you've got a $1 million property, and in scenario one, you take all of your spare money, all of your savings, and you aggressively pay down the debt as much as you possibly can over a 10-year period. And let's just hypothetically say that you paid off the whole $1 million property in a 10-year period, right? But the requirement was you used all of your savings and all of your cash to do so, and you couldn't invest in anything else. So now you've got $1 million property debt-free. Awesome. Rock and roll. I'm happy for you. That's great. Scenario two is you put it on a 5-year interest-only period, and then you refinance it again to another 5-year interest-only period. You never pay down any principal out of your own pocket. You take all of your other savings, and then you go and invest, and you create an additional $2 million over 10 years of capital. Then you go back to property number, you sell down some of those assets, go back to property number one, pay that down. Let's just say it took $900,000 to pay it down. So then you've got a $1 million property that you own outright. And then you've got an additional 1.1 million that you've created. So you would have, now I've just made those numbers up, right? I've just made those numbers up completely. But just to illustrate the point that putting your capital to work in smarter ways is going to help you to move faster. And just the idea, the sort of Dave Ramsey model of just like, pay down your debt, all debt is bad, I think is a farce. Now, do I think you should have debt on cars? No. Should you have debt on depreciating assets? No. Having debt on assets which are growing faster than the cost of capital is the key. So unless the asset is growing faster than the cost of capital, it's a waste of time.
How about in retirement though? Because I think a lot of people have a vision that once they retire and eventually pass, they'll have no debt.
Well, this goes down to like, what's the objective, right? So if the objective is to have a portfolio that can produce enough cash flow for you to live off, then actually the objective is cash flow, not debt. Now, you may have a vision that you want to live debt free, and that's fine. But let's just say, you had, and again, we're using very generalized numbers here. So no, anyone at home listening to this and getting the calculator out, just chill out. All right. So just take it
Happy
easy.
Wednesday, guys.
Yeah. So I got a bit of sass today. So let's say you've got a $2 million property portfolio that you own debt free that produces $100,000 of income. So 5% net yield, 5% net cash flow. Yeah, that's cool. So let's say alternatively you have a $4 million. Let's say you have a $4 million property portfolio that has a 50% LVR. Right, that has a 2.5% net cash flow. You're still going to have $100,000. You're still going to have $100,000 net cash flow. So if $100,000 net cash flow is your goal, then you've got it. But you also control $4 million worth of property. Yep. So people have this fear, right? People have this fear of debt's all bad. I don't want to have any debt. But the objective is how do you get to your financial goals? So, the same thing goes. Let's say you had a $10 million property portfolio and you owned, let's say you had a $10 million property portfolio that had an 80% LVR on it, and whatever the net yield would be to get to $100,000 cash flow off a $10 million property, 1% net yield, net cash flow off that you'd own a $10 million property portfolio, and you've retired and you've got no more income coming in. You don't have a job, but somehow you've got the debt and somehow all of that exists. I don't know. I don't think that's a bad outcome. Now, you may be
Mm.
like, oh, but what happens if interest rates go up or something like that? It's like, cool, you could sell down some of the properties. It's not a big deal. Like people get scared that debt is this boogeyman that's going to come out of the closet at night and come and,
Mm.
take you in the night. And it's not that, that's not the case at all. Like you can adapt and adjust, particularly if you've created buffers in your, like if you've refinanced equity and you've got it sitting in offset accounts and you've got appropriate buffers. Now, if you go into retirement and you're redlining on everything, okay, maybe that's not a good idea. But if you've created appropriate buffers in your portfolio and appropriate buffers in your life, you've got appropriate financial buffers, and you own some properties and you've got some leverage, even in retirement, and then let's say interest rates go up and you're like, oh, shit, okay, this is going to eat all my cash flow and I don't want this anymore, or I don't know, whatever. Something's happened and something changes. You can just sell some of the properties. It's not a big deal. Like it's not the end of the world. And people get really scared about this idea of selling properties. They're like, what if something happens and I'm forced to sell? It's like, well, fine, then you sell. Like it's not a big deal. They're just properties. It's all good. Now, obviously, you don't want to sell for a loss or anything like that. But this is like, you're not going to go into, you shouldn't go into retirement taking maximum portfolio risk. If you are going into retirement with a portfolio that carries debt, you want to be going into retirement with a managed amount of debt or a managed amount of cash buffers. You don't want to go in there. You don't want to, like, let's say you're retiring on your 60th birthday. You don't want to, in your 59th year, you don't want to go and build a property portfolio that's $10 million property portfolio that's leveraged to 90% and have no cash buffers. I mean, like that would be a little audacious, right? Even I wouldn't do that. That's crazy. Could you go into retirement with a $10 million property portfolio with an 80% LVR, effective LVR, with $1 million of cash floating around in your, let's say, available in your super, or let's say available sitting in offset, or, all of that kind of stuff. Neutral Rockets has posted something in here, which is really good. And we're going to talk about that in a moment, but we'll stick on the property piece for a minute. So I think debt is psychological more than anything else, as long as it's in productive assets. So does that kind of help answer that question?
Yeah, I think I'd love to just touch on let's touch on CGT. Not to poke the bear even more. I can feel you're pretty spicy today, but because I think like even reframing selling as a concept, like as a through line through this is like, David's original question was like, how can we do it without selling? And I think a big part of that is like, it's the emotional part, particularly if you think about like your home. If a big part of your wealth is your home and you think, oh, I don't really want to sell that at some point. Also maybe just the headache of like, I can't be bothered. If I don't have to sell, I'd rather not. But then big part being the CGT, because, could be up to 50% of any gain that you make on that asset. You just lose just used to tax. But how should people be thinking about this as they're approaching retirement, particularly as it relates to selling? Because again, it might be the most logical solution where you let go of an asset that has reached a certain point where it's time to let it go.
Yeah.
Part of that may be that you pay CGT. So how would you factor that in?
Yes. Firstly, let me just say I thought of a great acronym for CGT, and it's the country's greatest theft. So,
just then.
Yeah, just then.
Well
just
done.
put it down.
Well done.
There we go. And that's the show for today, guys. No,
yeah,
so
see you next week.
no, so we can touch on a really good point. I actually think CGT is better than income tax, and I think that one of the things.
Can I put that on a t-shirt?
Which country's greatest theft, or capital CGT is better than income tax?
That would be better. Both.
Either, both.
Put
right, t-shirts coming. That's fine. Yeah. So I think that what we need to do, the royal we collectively, is we need to stop thinking about things in terms of cash flow and growth, and just think about it as capital with different tax treatments. Because if you gave me an option to sell $100,000 worth of capital assets and pay CGT, or receive $100,000 of income, of passive income, which would I prefer? I would prefer to sell $100,000 of capital assets and pay CGT, assuming I get the 50% CGT discount. Now, why would I do that? Now, let's assume, for those of you who don't know how CGT works, you pay capital gains tax as the way it's calculated is based on your marginal tax rate. So let's assume that you're making a very large gain, and that gain would push you into the highest marginal income tax bracket of being whatever it is, 45% or whatever, 45%, right? Ish.
Yep.
If you hold typically, if you hold the asset for longer than 12 months, you get a 50% discount on that capital gains tax. So let's say you make $1 million capital gain, and that pushes you into the marginal tax bracket of 45%. That would theoretically be a $450,000 tax, but you get a 50% CGT discount. That makes it a $225,000 tax, right? So you're only paying 22.5%. Call it 25%, just for simplicity's sake. So you're paying 25% on CGT, but if you're paying an income tax, you're probably going to pay 30% or more, depending on what your tax bracket is at the time. But you're going to pay more. You're probably going to pay more than 25%. So I don't. I don't like CGT, but it is what it is. It's the rules of the game, right? So when you're playing the game of investing in Club Australia has rules. Part of those rules are you pay fees when you liquidate assets. CGT is one of them. That's just part of the game. You can disagree with it, but that's just like shouting into the wind. Who cares? No one does.
True.
Right?
But part of that game is you get the benefit of the upside of the asset class.
Totally, right? So it just is what it is, right? It's just like whatever. Who cares? So I don't worry about CGT too much at all. In fact, my personal preference would be to pursue growth, because growth, when liquidated, becomes cash flow. So growth is a cash flow. Liquid growth is cash flow. Now, let's say you've got a property, and let's say you sell that property, and let's say it takes you 90 days to liquidate that asset from the moment you list it to the moment it's sold, to the moment you get your cash, right? So that is still cash flow. It's just like a really slow. It's like when you go make a bank transfer to someone and it can take 2 days to get there, right? In this case, it's like someone's paying you. It's just taking 90 days to get there. So you want to withdraw the capital out of your asset, but it's just going to take 90 days to get there. So it's like a really slow transaction. So real estate's illiquid, but it doesn't mean that it's less liquid, but it's not illiquid, right? You can still sell the asset and release the capital. And you can use that. You spend that. It's not like you get this $100,000 of capital from growth that somehow you can't spend, because that's not cash flow. That's growth. I don't know. You do something up with it, but you can't spend it. It doesn't make any sense. It's cash, right? You can spend it. So growth is cash flow if used in the same way as cash flow. It just may come in a lumpy form, right? And by the way, even rental income comes in a lumpy form. You don't get it. You don't get paid rent by the second. You get paid rent by the month, right? So you may receive rent in like 12 monthly lumps, or you may sell an asset at the end of the year and get it in one lump in 12 months. So we're all just talking different sized lumps. Okay, so CGT is just par for the course. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. Obviously, you want to hold assets for longer than 12 months to avail yourself of the long-term CGT discount. But one of the other things to consider as well is self-managed super funds. I will stress again, this is not financial advice. Self-managed super funds is an area that we can get into a lot of trouble. So make sure you go speak to someone who's qualified to give you advice on self-managed super funds. I am not that guy, but let's talk about them in a general sense. So you don't pay CGT in your self-managed super fund. So one of the issues with growing a property portfolio into self-managed super fund is you can't leverage the equity out of one property to go buy another one. So the kind of wealth flywheel that you can create by building a property portfolio isn't available to you in a self-managed super fund. It doesn't mean that buying property in a self-managed super fund is a bad idea, because you can still get the benefit of leverage. So you can buy one asset, it can grow, you can sell it down, you can do all kinds of stuff. It's just not as effective as buying outside of your super. But one thing you can do is, and I'll say it again, not tax advice, not financial advice, but one thing you could consider doing is selling. If you let's say you're in retirement. So let's walk through a scenario here. So let's say I'm planning to retire and I've got a bunch of properties and I don't want to sell those properties yet. And so what I do is I take my current borrowing capacity and I refinance all of my properties to a 30-year loan term from whatever they are to extend that out and to minimize the repayments. Yeah. And I refinance as much equity out as I possibly can, and I put that into an offset account. Great. So I've now accessed as much equity as I can tax-free, and I've extended the loan. Perfect. Awesome. Good. Now, from those offset accounts, I can use that like cash flow. I can go spend the money, now it's got a carrying cost, it's got interest attached to it, but I can still go spend that money. So that way I've used the equity without crystallizing a capital gains event. Okay. Now, let's say that lasts and satisfies me for several years. So let's say 5 years for the point of the discussion. And then I go, okay, look, I'm going to need to start thinking about this a little bit differently, because maybe I've got some cash left over in the offsets, but if I sell the properties, maybe I'm going to have a big CGT bill or something like that. But maybe the properties have gone up enough, right? So let's say you can sell the properties and still come out ahead after you've paid CGT. So let's say you start selling down some properties and you pay CGT. Okay, all good. Now you've already realized some of that capital, so you're not going to end up with as big of a windfall, because you will have realized some of that capital by taking out the equity and spending that in advance. Fine, all good. But once with that leftover capital, what you can then do is, subject to your maximum super contributions, because there's a contribution cap. Don't quote me on this. I think it's 120 grand. Anyway, I think it's 120 grand. Don't quote me on that. Speak to an accountant, right? But let's say that because you've already taken capital out of the property because you've refinanced it into an offset account, you've already spent some of that equity in advance, and then you sell it, and then after the CGT, you're left with $100,000, right, of post-tax profit at the end of the day. You could potentially then put that into your super account, and then you could invest it in something like equities or whatever. You could invest in more liquid assets in your self-managed super fund, and you won't pay CGT as you draw them down. So let's say you go and buy a bunch of Tesla and then slowly spend some of that down, then that's not going to be subject to CGT as well. So then you get the benefit of that way. So that makes sense?
Yes.
So
yes.
Let me go in a slightly different direction here, because we've covered a couple of different ways here. So there's a couple of golden rules that people need to think about. If you're going to head into retirement, you should assume that after you retire, your refinance capability goes to zero, and you should plan ahead accordingly. Yep. If you personally are not comfortable refinancing and putting stuff into an offset account and doing it like that, all good, no problem. Do whatever is appropriate for you. The classic model for creating a reliable residual income stream from real estate is to go through two specific phases. One is an accumulation phase, where you grow your portfolio as big as you can, with the specific focus being on maximizing the return on invested capital. That's the specific goal in phase one. Don't worry about cash flow. Just like the cash flow levels need to be able to support your ability to be able to support your portfolio, and that's it. You're not trying to create an income stream. Maximizing your return on invested capital. Then when you're like, okay, I've had enough fun playing this game, I want to go and play a different game, or I want to stop working, or I'm going to move to a stage where my ability to get debt is going to be significantly diminished. Maybe you want to move overseas, or maybe you want to whatever. Let's just say your situation is going to change and you're no longer going to be able to go and get debt. That's time to start thinking about consolidating your portfolio and then selling, either doing the whole refinance thing like I talked about, or selling down some of your assets and then using that capital to lower the LVR on your existing assets, or pay them out completely, or selling your assets and buying higher cash flow assets that for the specific objective of creating a residual income stream, right? So that's the simplest way to think about it. Now, back to the sort of the point. And by the way, one of the things to consider in that is trusts, and using that as part of an estate planning strategy, where you can, move assets in your family, keep assets in the family by changing the beneficial owners of the trust without having to sell them, having to sell them to transfer the ownership. It's very important to think about that. Yep. Now, the other way to think about this is what other assets could you invest in, or how else could you support this, and what are you seeking in retirement, right? So, depending on what your objective is in retirement, you need to think about things from a couple of different lenses. So, I think it was Mina that put in the in the community. She said there's kind of three lenses, right? Do you want to talk about those?
So
I've got them here.
Yeah, the three main questions from Mina being: can I afford to retire? So, like, on a financial basis. Do I want to retire on a lifestyle/purpose basis? And am I ready to, on an emotional and family alignment basis? which I think are all really important things to think through, because I think we're focusing a lot on the financial, and I think particularly in this space, people want mechanics. People want to talk about like, okay, what's the juicy finance strategy? How do I use structures, and how do I move stuff around, and how do I
Yeah.
time this perfectly? But a lot of that is also just thinking through like, what else, like what do I actually want from retirement? Do I
Yeah.
have to wait until I'm 60, 65? Are there other ways that I could do that sooner?
Yeah.
All of these different questions about like what else factors into retirement.
Yeah. So focusing on the financial part first is really, really important, because like, how
Mm.
much do you need is a really big question.
Mhm. Yep.
Because owning $2 million of real estate that gives you a 5% net yield, that gives you $100,000 passive income, is good if
Mm.
all you want is $100,000 passive income. Now, let's assume that it goes up by 8% a year on average. So you're making 5% cash flow plus 8% growth. So we'll call that 13%. That's good, because then you hold the assets, right?
Mhm.
But perhaps you want more income than that. And so maybe that $2 million needs to be allocated in a different way to get a different financial outcome. So maybe instead of having $2 million invested in real estate that gives you a 5% net yield, if you had $2 million invested in, other assets that might go up by say 20% a year, then
Mhm.
that's going to give you $400,000 a year, and you could take $100,000 out and then have an additional $300,000 to invest every year. So that's one piece.
Yep.
You want to add something to
Yep.
that?
No, I was just remembering we actually have so the die with zero calculator that you put together a couple of weeks ago
Months?
is help
Yep.
months. It's helpful for all of this as well, because I think through, so there's a basic like, what do I need to replace my income as it is today? But then you also add the layer of, I would like a nice lifestyle as well. Like I would like to reach retirement and be able to travel. I would like to be able to be generous with my community. All these different things, so you can map out. I believe in that calculator, we have like elements of where you can factor in like lifestyle costs.
I think you might be. I think you might be overselling. You might be overselling the calculator a little bit, I think.
Maybe I can update it.
Yeah. Maybe it's due for an
I'll
update.
add a row in. Let's go.
The step we failed in that process is it didn't go through the Gabby makes it nice phase. So
It didn't. It didn't. It was straight from Goose.
Just yeah. So yeah. So thinking about how you're allocating capital to support your specific financial needs is really, really important. Now, what I would say to that is,
Yep.
having a multi-asset strategy is important,
Yeah.
because if I was just look at the real estate example that I just gave and say $2 million of capital tied up that gives me 5% net cash flow and 8% illiquid growth that I may not be able to tap into at all unless I sell the asset, I might not be satisfied that that is an effective use of capital, or maybe I can think of other ways to deploy capital better. That doesn't mean that I would not want to own real estate, because I think that what you actually need to do is you need to think about, where is the world going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and 40 years, and what types of assets do you want to own over that period of time, noting that you can change things. Some things easier than others. But I think owning real estate as a perennial part of your portfolio is very, very, very important. It might not be 100% of your retirement portfolio. It might be 50%, or it might be 35%, or it might be it might be 80%. I don't know. But I think even if it isn't as capital efficient as some other options might be, it is resilient. It is highly productive. It's scarce. It's desirable. It's practical. It's physical. Like, there's a lot of things going for it, and I don't think it's a sensible retirement strategy to not own real property, right? To own real physical, real world assets. Now, gold is also something you may want to consider having some of in your retirement as well. But people have heard my point of view on gold. I'm not anti-gold. I'm just not massively for it. But when you think about like real world assets, it's something you should consider. Although gold's not productive and real estate is.
Yeah. Just
go on.
Just quickly, because you're moving on to other assets now, right?
Maybe not.
Maybe. Well, who knows? I something just came to mind in terms of real estate as well. Like, it's one of the hard parts about that asset class is that obviously the cost to entry is so big, and it's like the asset size is so it's like one unit. Like you buy a house or you buy multiple houses, but you will never have like a million houses, whereas you can have a million Bitcoin. That would be great. You could have a million shares. You can have all of these different other asset classes that are much smaller units. So if you ever need to
Yeah.
sell a different type of asset,
Yeah.
it's easier with others than with real estate. Whereas if you have one property, if you want to sell, you have one option. You sell 100% of your
Yeah.
portfolio or you sell none. Whereas if you had
Bingo.
2, you could sell half of your portfolio and keep half. If you have 10, you could sell 10% of your portfolio, keep 90%. So there
Yeah.
is a benefit there in having multiple properties, I guess, if you are thinking through like having optionality of selling down this growth asset that I've built versus, let's say you owned one mansion in Sydney for $3 million.
Yeah.
If you don't have the borrowing capacity to be able to refinance that out, the only option you really have is to sell it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, I think an ideal number is probably 4 or more assets to own in retirement. But there's been a couple of questions in the chat which I think are very relevant, and they sort of tie into things that I want to talk about as well. So I'm gonna pick them up as well. So,
Great.
you know, we talked about say, let's say having a $2 million property portfolio, say $500,000 properties yielding a 6%, 5% net. That's going to give you $100,000. That's going to give you $100,000 of residual income, but it comes with headaches. It comes with tenants and repairs and property managers and rates notices and all of this shit. So are you better to just take that $2 million and put it into like a 10% yielding dividend stock? And instead of getting $100,000 a year, you're going to get $200,000 a year, and you won't have the headaches. Well, this goes back to my previous point that it may not be as efficient a use of capital at that latest, particularly. So one of the benefits of real estate is the application of leverage. When you take the leverage out of it and you put it side by side with other assets, you know, it's not the most capital efficient asset. But one of the benefits is you own a physical real world asset, which I think in the long term is a very smart thing to have. So it's not about, I don't think it's a case of just like all or nothing. You know, but I think that you should be smart about how you think about allocating capital. So, so Neutral Rockets, to your point, selling it, I don't even know. I don't even know.
Neutral.
Neutral.
Newt.
So Neutral Rocket said, how about selling up and moving everything to high yielding dividend stocks? Again, back to my point. Maybe you want to do a portion of that. Maybe you want to have some element of that. But I don't think selling everything and getting out of real estate is a smart move. They also said, I hear of large portfolios of real estate just being a headache to manage, plus the land tax becomes a real drag, hence the question of dividend stocks in retirement. Again, I think it can be useful, but what percentage of your portfolio? Because again, dividend stocks are not going to give you a very good overall return. They may lag monetary debasement and monetary inflation by a significant amount. Like they might be yielding at 10% and growing at 1%, and so therefore you've got an 11% total return versus real estate, which might be giving you a 5% net yield and growing at 8%, which is a 13% real return, which is still underperforming debasement. Or maybe you buy some technology equities or some Bitcoin or whatever. Maybe that grows by 30% or 40% in a year. And so diversification is important. But we're going to be careful we don't over diversify, right? If you over diversify and you just try and put a little bit everywhere, then you're just going to end up with a whole pile of muck that underperforms. So owning some real estate, I think, is like, if you think about, going back to my point of thinking about where the world is going to go in the next 40 years. If we go 40 years back from today, I was born nearly 40 years ago. I'm 39 right now, right? So if I go back to when I was born in 1986, I mean, I don't remember 1986 because I was just born. But if I go a couple of years after that, you know, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have, we didn't have the internet. We had a TV that had like 3 or 4 channels on it, and wire aerials sticking out the top. Like we didn't have. There's so much of what exists today didn't exist then. And so if you think about what life's going to be like in 40 years, you actually have to then consider what things are going to change and what things are going to stay the same. One of the things that's going to stay the same is that people will need will need real estate to live in. They need shelter and dwellings. So I think from a long-term perspective, owning real estate is a very intelligent thing to do. And I think that you would weaken your portfolio in the long term by taking all of your capital out of real estate. So I think it makes sense to keep some. Now, you can, if you're property passionate, you can just have real estate and just go, bang, that's all I'm going to do. I'm just going to have real estate. That's going to be my single source of income and wealth and all of that kind of stuff in time. And that's totally fine. You can also then think about how to redeploy capital. Well, now there was another question in here from Neutral Rockets as well. Can you ever get to the point where the passive income from your property portfolio is enough for banks to lend on, continuously extract equity, etc.? Now, I'll preface this by saying I am not a lending expert. Callum from Dash.Finance would be far better placed to answer this. But in principle, yes. In principle, yes. Let's say you've got a $10 million property portfolio and it's yielding, let's say it's fully paid off and it's yielding at 5% net, right? That'd be 500 grand a year, right, of income. Then that would be income. That'd be genuine income that you would then be able to use to go and get a loan to refinance equity out of your property. So yeah, I mean the short answer. And Catherine's just confirmed that that's what she did as well. So yes, if you get your property portfolio to the point where it creates the income stream, that income stream is then a genuine income stream that you can then use to then go and refinance more equity. Now you've just got to be careful that as you do that, obviously you're increasing the cost of capital. So you've got to just little bit by little bit. And this is also one of the reasons why I think it's sensible to continue to own real estate, because it's a productive asset. It's going to do stuff for you, right? So it's going to allow you to, it's going to continue to grow in value. It's going to allow you to leverage more equity. It's going to allow you to create an income stream, all of that kind of stuff. So I think it's smart to have that as part of your retirement strategy. That being said, I think also that it is a good idea to have a strategy which is broadly, has some other elements to it, right? So if you were to, if I had to choose between having $1 million that gives me a 5% liquid return plus an 8% of liquid return, that gives me $50,000 of cash flow plus $80,000 of growth, or $1 million asset that gives me a 20% liquid return, I'd probably choose the 20% liquid return. Now, again, in context, I wouldn't want to not own real estate, right? So we've got to take that into consideration too. But this goes back to my earlier point around we should think about capital differently. It's not about cash flow or growth. It's about liquid or illiquid. It's about what is the tax treatment, because all cash is cash when you can spend it. So if you can get 40% growth, and this is one of the things between value investors that missed out on Amazon, because all of the back into, let's say in the year 2000 and 1999, none of the value investors could see the value in Amazon because they're like, oh, it's not profitable, doesn't produce any free cash flow. The earnings, it was like a stupidly high price to earnings ratio. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's ridiculous. But the reality is it went up by, I don't know the percentages, but it's obviously one of the highest growth companies that's ever existed on the planet. And if you'd bought $10,000 of Amazon stock in the year 2000 versus $10,000 of some high yielding, value investor, type asset, you'd have done far better off with the Amazon stock. You'd be very, 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 very wealthy. In fact, there's a great story of an artist, I think Daniel Cho, if I remember his name correctly. So he got asked when Facebook was setting up its office, its HQ, he got asked to do a mural on the wall. And they said, we'll give you we got a choice. The price to do the mural was $60,000. They said, we'll either give you $60,000 cash or we'll give you $60,000 in stock, in equity in Facebook. He took the equity because he was just an artist. He didn't really care about money anyway. And he was like, yeah, bugger it. Like, let's just take a shot. And so he did the mural. When Facebook went public, that was worth, that amount of equity was worth $200 million. If he still held it all today, it'd be worth $5 billion. Right? And it's insane. It's totally insane, right? And so think really sort of expanding our horizons and thinking about this kind of stuff is very, very important. And so having a combination of liquid and illiquid assets that are going to be durable through different economic situations, assets that are positioned to maximize the value capture of where we're going over the next 5, 10, 20, 40 years. These are all very, very, very important things to think about. The other thing, going back to the kind of retirement framing, so if you can think about that, so number one, defining what financial outcome you need. Most people don't need as much money as they think. Now you can either optimize for what you need or you can optimize for what you want. And there's no right answer. There's no right answer. But whichever one you choose is going to have is going to lead you down a different path. If you decide to optimize for what you need, then maybe you're optimizing for 80 grand or 100 grand a year, and that's all you need to make. And that's actually pretty easy. It's actually pretty easy to do. You can do that. Like almost anyone can do that, right? As long as you have a bit of focus, and use a little bit of use a bit of nous and invest intelligently, you can get to that point. That's actually really not it's not out of reach.
Yep.
If you said that you want $500,000 a year income, that's 5 times as much. Okay, that means that you're either going to need to be far more aggressive in the way you invest and take more risk, which could potentially lead to failure and you miss out, or it's going to take you longer, or it's going to be harder. It's going to be some other dimension. And so let's say version 1 is you can get from a standing start to $100,000 passive income in, let's just say 10 years, just for the simplicity's sake. But version 2 is you want to get to $500,000 income, and that takes you 25 years. You need to decide what is more important to you. Is it getting to a place where you have your freedom sooner, or is it getting to a place where you have the income that you want sooner? Now, you also need to make sure that you're accounting for things like, monetary debasement and inflation and all of that kind of stuff. Because if you just optimize for $100,000 income today and you haven't optimized for a way for that to grow in line with kind of CPI at the very least, then you're going to find that in 10 years' time, that $100,000 isn't what you need it to be. Now, shifting gears from that, you need to ask yourself, what are you trying to retire into? Because different people at different phases of life, and I think this is a really, really kind of important next piece to touch on. What are you going to do? Because if your objective is to be able to retire from your current work so that you can go and pursue something else that you're really interested in that may actually derive an income, but it's just the thing you want to do, not the thing you're forced to do, then, and let's say you're 30 years old, right? And you want to retire. Let's say you want to retire at 30 so that you can go and, I don't know, be an artist or try starting a business or whatever the case may be. There's a fair chance that the thing you're going to do is still going to produce some sort of income. Potentially, you can even live off that income, which means your investments aren't the source, don't need to be the source of your retirement income. If you're 65 and you're saying, hey, my vision is that for the next 30 years, I want to sleep in until 9 a.m., drink coffee on the couch until 11 a.m., go out and garden for 2 hours, go back in, have a nap, get up, have dinner, go back to bed, right? Which is actually pretty much what a lot of retirees do. Then you probably don't need much money, right? And B, those activities are not going to create an additional income stream. So when people say retire, we need to define what we mean by retire. Now, I think that for most people, it is retire to pursue the things that they're more interested in. And in many cases, that can lead to an income, particularly if you're slightly earlier in life. If you're 40 years old or whatever, the likelihood that you're not going to want to do anything that has any economic gain attached to it for the next 40 years or whatever is slim. If you're 65, slightly different story. Maybe you just want to just enjoy life. If you've worked from the age of 20 or 18 or whatever to the age of 65, maybe you're just like, you know what? No, I don't. I don't want to exchange my time for money. I don't give a shit. I just want to go and play bocce or whatever, right? Fine, all good.
Love
but
bocce.
Bocce is great. But deciding what retirement is very, very, very important. Do you want to travel the world? Do you want to stay home and garden? Are you a young retiree that you still have dependent kids at home that you need to take into consideration? Are you an average age retiree in the sort of 50s and 60s maybe you don't have dependent kids? Like all of these different lifestyle factors really shape up how you think about retirement. And I think that's a very key thing that a lot of people don't think about. They just think like I've got to stop work, right? Retirement is stop work. And my number one objective is stop work. So
Yep.
stop work and do what is, I think, a big piece.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's on a technical level, retirement in Australia, I believe it's just that you're able to now access your super after a certain age.
Yeah.
And that's basically technically all that retirement technically is. You don't have to stop working. You don't have, and for that matter, if you don't have a need to access your super because you're an investor and you've been able to create your own wealth outside of your super, that point in the timeline could be anywhere. Just means you still won't be able to access your, Australian super fund until you reach that age. But that technicality could be at any point, right?
Yeah,
Which makes it more important of like, what do I want for my life?
Yeah, totally. And really honing in on that question, I think, is actually the most important thing you can do. I actually, so for those of you who don't know, I'm on a bodybuilding journey. And I was talking to my bodybuilding coach yesterday. He's just turned 30. So he's just at that age where he's like his 20s. He's been traveling the world and, he's a very successful athlete in a lot of ways. And he's been competing. He's been setting all of these like quite big fitness goals. And I sort of asked him, like, why are you doing this? Like, why are you setting all these goals? And he's like, I don't know. I just feel like I need to, I just need to make sure I'm achieving something. I'm like, okay, where do you want to be in 10 years time? And he's like, good question. I've got no idea. Like, certainly not doing this. I'm like, okay, well, maybe you need to put some thought into where you want to be in 10 years time when you're 40. So you can start to build a bridge to get to where you want to be. Right.
Yep.
And thinking into the future is something that a lot of people just don't do enough of. You hear a lot of stories of business owners who sell their companies. They have a company for 10 or 20 years, then they sell their companies, but they haven't thought about what to do next. So they spend the first week playing golf 5 days a week. And by the second week, they're in the pits of depression because they don't know what the hell to do with their life. And you really need to think that through, because what you may find is that there's a path that allows you to live a rich and full and exciting life that is different to what you've got now if you just use a bit of imagination. Now, just because we live in Southeast Asia doesn't mean that I think that that's the one size fits all solution for everyone. But just to kind of ideate onto the table, you may decide that retiring in your current neighborhood in Melbourne or Sydney is not actually really the thing you want to do. Maybe it was a great place to bring up your family. Maybe it had great proximity to the work that you were doing. Maybe part of the reason you live there is because it's got good proximity to work. But if you didn't have to work, is that still where you would be? Maybe you could move to Da Nang in Vietnam and live on $1,000 a month, which completely changes the calculus of retirement, full stop. Maybe you move to India for 3 months. Maybe like there's any number of things that you could do which can completely change the calculus of how you're thinking about retirement. And it could actually allow you to retire earlier. It could allow you to retire better, or it could allow you to retire differently. But getting very clear on what that is and what's most important to you. For a lot of people, proximity to family is very important. I know someone who's we both know them, very, very successful investor, like extremely successful investor, who said to us, if I was in your shoes, I'd be doing exactly what you guys are doing. And I said, well, why don't you? And he's from an ethnic family, and the family unit is really important. He's like, can't do it. Family's all here, cousins, dad, mom, all this kind of stuff. Like it's family is such a big part of their culture that he couldn't possibly move away, even though he's like ridiculously wealthy. And he would, if the family piece wasn't there, he would just go live somewhere else. He'd go move to Asia, or he'd travel somewhere, or do something different. But what's more important to him is actually being close to his family. So he's choosing higher taxes. He's choosing location constriction. He's like, location dependence, all of these different things, because that's what's most important to him in his retirement. So getting clear on not only what is required for you to afford the retirement you want, but what actually is the retirement you want. There was this great study, and I think we brought it up at one time before, and I included it in a blog. But there was a study done by the Wall Street Journal around how do retirees spend their time. I did a blog on it a couple of years ago, and I'll post it into the community. But basically, it's something like 75% of their time is spent either napping or watching TV. Right? That's what retirement is for most
in reality,
people. in reality,
Yeah.
right? Everyone has these dreams of like, I'm going to retire and I'm going to travel the world and I'm going to do all this stuff. But the actual pragmatic reality is most people sit around and do nothing. So,
Yeah.
but and maybe it's a lack of imagination, maybe it's a lack of planning, maybe it's a lack of energy, maybe it's a lack of money. Any of those things can be solved with sufficient forward planning to really consider how to maximize the most out of it.
It is your favorite thing in the world, is planning.
Yes. Yeah, and
No,
living in the future.
yeah. I was just thinking through, it's like we touched on this it was a couple of months ago when we did the how to design a life you won't regret in the next 5 years episode.
Yeah.
And Tim Ferriss also has the concept of mini retirements from the 4-hour work week.
Yeah.
And I think prototyping, as we talk about, so important with this in mind as well, because it particularly, like if we take that example of someone that's very close to the family unit, they have this inkling that they would like to move away, but they're like really not sure. So rather than designing your whole life around like, okay, I'm going to reach this age and I'm just going to like disappear, just like rip the band-aid off, you could do that. That would be an experience in itself. But if you don't want that stress, you can plan these mini prototyping experiences where you go, okay, you know what? 3 months, let's go and live in Turkey. I don't know, pick somewhere and test it out. And you can, because then you're actually sure, it helps you to clarify that vision, because you can come back and go like, no, I missed my creature comforts. I miss going to see my mum every Sunday for coffee. Like I missed all of these like mini things. You would way rather know that sooner, so you have more time to plan the retirement that you actually want whenever that comes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more. And this is what actual planning and getting into a financial position allows you to do, because you know there are dozens of examples that I can think of where individuals have retired, then gone and found a passion, or gone and done something, or gone to try things and gone back. Right. And so the thing is, when you are on an arc in the early stage of your life, you're trying to potentially, you may be, depending on your situation, maybe you're trying to climb the career ladder, or you're trying to increase your earning capability, or you're trying to invest to get your family ahead. You're on this like journey of attainment, right? You're either trying to, maybe you're not trying to climb a career ladder, but maybe you're trying to bring up a family and also trying to grow wealth at the same time by investing the money you've got, right? So maybe you're not sort of, but all of it is this like journey of attainment where you're trying to expand your current position so that you can allow yourself the optionality to do other things. Now, the optionality to do other things is really interesting, because I have seen, again, dozens of examples that I can think of where people who had really successful careers, maybe as hedge fund managers and stuff like that, decided that they'd made enough money and they were going to retire. And then they retire and they go and start a little hobby farm. And then that becomes a little business where they teach people how to hobby farm, or they maybe run a YouTube channel documenting their journey, and that becomes like a little source of income, and it's a little passion project that they really love, or you know, or they have like tours of people that come to their property to see how things are. Like there's all these different ways. Now, you may also then look at that and go, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to make YouTube videos, and God, last thing I want to do is like teach people stuff. God, like, because some people don't want to do that. It's totally fine.
Yep.
But maybe the thing is that you get to take some of the skills you've got and consult, find people who just need some of your knowledge. Or maybe you can not do anything. Maybe you can just go to Turkey and for 3 months and then go, okay, great. I've tried that out. I've had a little break. I've had a mini retirement. But you know what? I'm actually not quite ready for that. I was actually enjoying the consistency of rocking up to a place. And I like being part of a team, and I want to work, but I don't want to have to take it so seriously. We actually have people at Dashdot who don't have to work. We've actually had plenty of people come to work at Dashdot who don't need to work anymore, but they want a place to work because they want to be part of something that they enjoy, doing meaningful work. And so they come to work and they love their work and they're passionate about their work. But it's not this like attainment thing. It's a fulfillment thing where they're like, yes, I'm part of a good team of good people doing good work and things that I care about. That's also a good way to spend your time. You know, maybe you find something else to do. But the point here is that the journey of retirement doesn't necessarily have to end in a journey of no more income. The journey of retirement can just be a journey for you to be able to step away from that journey of attainment and move to a journey of fulfillment. And I think that's a really different way to frame that up. Whereas phase one is like you're trying to grow yourself to a place where you can focus more of your time and attention on fulfillment rather than attainment. And if that's the place you get to, then that can take any number of forms. I mean, I used to be an adventure motorcycle tour guide, and the guy who I used to work for, he now runs like motorcycle tours in Portugal, right? And you think about that, and he's just like he's taking tourists around like 40 kilometers an hour on motorbikes, putting around the countryside of Portugal. But it kind of sounds fun. You know what I mean? It's like, and it's like
there's so many things you could do.
Yeah, there's so many things you can do once you get away from that layer of the must to the want to, right? And really, that's the objective. And the question is just how quickly can you get there, and to what point would you be satisfied? Because I know this, but we've met people coming into Dashlot who have objectives of $1 million passive income, and it's like, yeah, fine, like if that's your goal, but like really, why is that your goal? Because you don't need that much money, right? So I think framing up what is the financial target that you're aiming for, and dimensionalize that. How much of that is liquid? How much of that is illiquid? Are you going to focus on income-based strategies, growth strategies? How are you going to think about capital, right? Remembering that all capital is spendable at the point that it becomes cash. How are you going to spend your time? So why do you want to retire? Like, how are you going to spend your time? What are you going to do? And where do you expect the world to be in 10, 20, 30, 40 years time? How do you plan accordingly? And are you ready for that? Or do you want to continue to push more? So I think if we sort of approach it through those lenses, then it can start to make more sense. Now, before we move to wrapping this up, Gabby, I have a question. Do you think we've satisfied? There's a lot of questions on this in the community.
Yes.
Do you think that we have satisfactorily answered many of the community questions, or do you think we just need to hit a couple of those off as well?
Let me just scroll through.
Actually, I got one here from Sam Westra, who may be on the stream at the moment, or maybe his work told him he had to go back to work. So I'm just
Sam, blink twice if you can hear us.
So Sam asked, he said he's only 27, but he wants to start his own earth moving and landscaping business, and he'd be able to use the cash flow out of the property portfolio to allow him to work a lot less. Now, firstly, what a great example of everything we were just talking about.
Nice.
Semi-retirement is actually retiring to actually go do something he's really passionate about, he wants to do. Now, I would just quickly, a little side story. One of our other clients, Jay, who got amazing results with his property portfolio, he started investing. He's been building his own digital marketing business, and the fact that he's had his portfolio in the background, that's in the space of a few years, in the space of 5 years, he made about $650,000 net return on his property portfolio in 5 years. For him to be able to do that as a young person under the age of 30, whilst he's building his own business, that gave him the confidence to know that he could take the risk on building his own business, which is now going great. So that's given him the ability to do that. And that's exactly how investing should give you more freedom. So, but to continue on, so Sam wants to be able to retire early or semi-retire to start an earth moving business. His current portfolio growth plan, which by the way, portfolio growth plan is going to be a great tool to help you work out how to use real estate to achieve your retirement goals. Obviously, it's real estate specific, but it is a great tool for that. And if you're a Dashlot client, speak to your property specialist or speak to one of the team and make sure you've got an updated portfolio growth plan. But his current portfolio growth plan has him selling down all of his growth assets to buy a high cash flow asset later on. I'm wondering if this is still a good idea because I have so many years of growth to capture before I want to fully retire. This kind of captures a couple of points. So number one, the portfolio growth plan that he's got shows growing the capital base and then selling down the assets to buy higher cash flow. In this case, it says a high cash flow asset, but that's actually probably a placeholder for multiple cash flow assets. So that's one thing you can do. But if you want to keep growing, you don't have to stop there. You can just continue to grow and then you end up with a bigger pie. So and this goes back to are you ready to retire? Now, Sam's portfolio growth plan says that by 2037, he can retire. But he might say, I don't want to do that then. I want to, I'm young and I want to keep going. That lends into the question of are you ready to retire? Do you want to retire? Or are you already achieving the things you want to achieve? So I think it's a really good lens to kind of put that through. just because and Sam, if you're listening, just because your portfolio growth plan says that you can retire at that point doesn't mean you have to. So, but I think it's a great way to approach it, that building a property portfolio is then going to allow him to go and pursue the thing that he wants to do, which is to build a business. It's great, right? So it's not actually sitting on a beach drinking pina coladas. It's doing something else productive, which is cool. What other questions do you think we need to cover off?
A lot of them are quite tactical, so it might make more sense that we pick them up in the community. But there's one from RuPaul, which I'll just pull out. There's a couple of questions in here, but one that I think we haven't really touched on. We don't have a whole lot of time, but what should be my investment strategy considering AI, climate change, etc., possibly affecting real estate prices in 10 years? Which I think even just considering AI, like considering the reality of the world that we are in. So we actually watched, there's a great Diary of a CEO episode that came out yesterday or the day before. I'm a big Raoul Pal fan. We're big Raoul Pal fans. And so he is very macro, think through timelines and where we are in history and how things change over time. And so a lot of the advice that you hear about, retirement plans and finance strategy and all this kind of stuff, it's in a bubble, it's in a box, ignoring the realities of where we are in the world and where we are on the timelines. And so this is a big consideration as well when we think about retirement, is how we should actually plan for retirement if we're approaching that phase, considering everything that's changing in technology and everything else.
100% agree. Most people, when they think about the future, they think about it as being some minor variation of the present. That's how we always think about the future. We think
I'll be a little bit older and I'll be a little bit wealthier, hopefully.
Yeah. It's basically, or I was thinking about this ages ago, and it's kind of like the way we think about the future is it is some combination of our personal history plus our present reality. It's some combination of that. Because if you think about having kids, you're thinking about them growing up in the way that you grew up as a kid, right? You'd be like, oh, they're going to be like that. They're going to, I remember riding my bikes when I was a kid. They're going to be doing that. They probably won't, right? So most people, when they think about the future, it is some combination of their own personal lived history and their current present reality with just a little bit of it might be a little bit different, right? But it's some version of that. It doesn't actually
like
really
5%
consider
different or something.
Yeah, exactly. If you think about how much the world has changed in the last 5 years and 10 years and 20 years, and Charlie said, kids don't ride bikes anymore. But if you think about how much the world has changed in the last 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years, and then overlay that forward, and if you then overlay the exponential rate of change, the amount of change that we've had in the last 40 years is going to be, we'll have that in the next 5, probably. Right. So there's a lot of, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, there'll be a century worth of change in the next decade. And I don't think that's hyperbolic. I don't think that's hyperbolic at all. And so the question then is, if we're going to have a century of change in the next decade, how much change are we going to have in the next 40 years? And how do we plan accordingly? I think RuPaul's question was sort of more based around the timelines of sort of 10 or 15 years, just looking at the question. So how do you think through that? And this is actually why I think it's very important to spend time thinking about the future, spend time thinking about the state of the world, spend time thinking about where the world is going, and invest accordingly. That is why we have a real estate investment company. Yes, I think we're the best in the country at what we do. So that's great. And yes, I think Australian residential real estate is the best risk-adjusted return asset that you can get. If you're in Australia and you're using leverage and you're working with Dashdot, like you're getting better returns than almost any asset on the planet, right? And on a risk-adjusted basis, you're killing it. That doesn't mean that I'm going to sit here as the CEO and co-founder of a property investment company and say, the truth, the right, and the way is real estate. And the only thing you should ever consider is real estate, and anything else, it's just hogwash. That doesn't make any sense at all. You need to consider a multi-dimensional future where you need to prepare for a variety of different probabilities. You need to prepare for the fact that you may need liquid capital at short notice. You need to prepare for the fact that many things are going to be disrupted. So if I look at the next, say, 5 years, I think that, and anyone who listened to the episode last week on Friday, we were talking about, when trust and money dies, what happens is you end up with a great melt up, right? And we're going to do some more episodes to continue on that series as well. What you end up with is a great melt up. You have asset prices go through the roof. Now, the thing is, in an AI-driven inflationary, when that's being driven by AI, the problem is AI is going to disrupt most of the companies. So what you'll see is the stock market will go through the roof. But then what happens? What happens to the stock market when we achieve artificial superintelligence? How does capital move? Like
Yeah.
you certainly can't trade better than artificial
All the arbitrage
superintelligence.
disappears.
Yeah, all of the arbitrage disappears. And so your ability to capture value in the equity markets goes away. Plus all the companies get disrupted. And so most of the companies die. And there'll be a handful of companies that capture most of the value. But then can you even buy those companies, or will the AI have worked out how to bid up the value? And the whole context around capital changes. The relationship between labor and capital breaks down as well. And this is actually one of the things that I'm most interested in. This is one of my most interesting topics I'd like to think about is the relationship between labor and capital, and what happens when the relationship between labor and capital breaks down and dies. That has so many far-reaching effects. Then you've also got to think about so let's say we move to a future where we have an AI-driven economy, and let's just say hypothetically we've got some scenario in the future where everyone gets to live a nice life, and it's not some post-apocalyptic thing, but the robots are doing all the work. How do robots transact? How does AI transact? How are they going to be transacting? Are they going to be using US dollars? I doubt it. What are they going to use? Are they going to use Bitcoin? Probably not, to be honest, right? Like probably they're going to be trading in tokenized kilojoules. So how do you then think about adapting to that? And so, but the way that I think about it is I think about it from a global perspective. So if we think about on a global basis, let's just say that 50% of jobs are going to be displaced by AI. Right now, it could be higher, but let's just say 50%. Noting that 30% unemployment was the Great Depression in the US. Let's say 50% of jobs globally get totally disrupted by AI, get taken away. Okay, fine. Some of those jobs are going to be in Australia for sure, and the US, and everywhere. They're going to be everywhere. But what will happen is some economies will feel that worse than others, and they will start to collapse and crash. And what happens is people move to islands of safety. So Australia is one of those places that's perceived as a safe, good economy with lots of opportunity and all of that kind of stuff. When countries' economies start failing, people are not going to be rushing to Eritrea. Oh, you know what? Oh, my country's economy is failing. I'm going to run to Eritrea, and that's where I'm going to find my salvation. They're not going to do that. You know where I'm going to go when in a crisis? I'm going to go to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. You're not going to do that. People are going to seek out countries that have got a solid brand reputation for economic prosperity and opportunity, and they're going to flood into those. And so what will happen is you'll end up having a drain of people from the areas that are getting areas that are being most disrupted. They'll be moving to places where the most opportunity exists, like people scrambling for lifeboats, basically, right? If you imagine that you're on a cruise ship, and the cruise ship is going down, and some of the lifeboats have got holes in them, and they've got cracks in them, and then people are going to be rushing to get on the lifeboats that are actually going to work, and that's what's going to happen. And Australia will be one of those countries because it's positioned in such a way that it's going to benefit from, Asia, US, Europe, everything. So Australia's in a really good position. So if you think through that, then owning real estate in a place where people want to, so think about it like this: owning a seat on a lifeboat. If a cruise ship has 100 lifeboats and 50 of those lifeboats have got holes in them, right? And you own a seat on one of the lifeboats that doesn't have a hole in it, how valuable do you think that seat's going to be? That's the effective equivalent of owning real estate in Australia over the long term, if you believe that AI is going to disrupt the economy and society in many ways and shapes and forms. And so thinking through this is why we've been actively talking about things like real estate. This is why we've been talking about Bitcoin. This is why we've been talking about technology equities, the way that I think about it is real estate is going to benefit from monetary inflation and from AI-driven monetary inflation, because the degree to which AI is deflationary, it forces governments to print more money. And then that forces asset prices up in Australia. Plus, other countries are going to collapse and force more immigration into Australia. Therefore, there's going to be a perpetual bid for Australian real estate. Bitcoin is a way to take your money out of an inflationary economy, and then technology equities. The lens with which to view technology equities is how much deflation will they cause. The companies that will create the most amount of deflation will create the most amount of value capture, and that's how you can think through those equities. So if you think through, for example, Samsung makes microchips, for example. Is that deflationary? No. Is there a high demand for microchips? Yes. Will they make a bunch of money? Yes. Is it like macro deflationary? No. Apple, deflationary. Amazon, deflationary. Tesla, deflationary. Now, I'm not saying go and invest in any of those companies specifically, but if you think about how they capture the most amount of value, they capture that through deflation. And so looking at where the future is going, considering AI, climate change, all of that kind of stuff, climate change is a bit of an interesting one. There's a few different ways you can carve that cake for sure, but mostly thinking through the lens of economic disruption. Real estate in Australia, I think, is a sound bet, and I think you'd make a mistake to not have that in your portfolio. You're back, ish. Gabby, it looks like you've got a bit of lag going on there. Okay, cool. Well, I think Gabby's internet and computer have somehow malfunctioned. Neutral Rockets, is it too early to start a prepper company selling canned food, water, and air filters? No, I don't think it is, actually. I don't think it is. And I'm not trying to put on the tinfoil hat prepper thing either, but I think a lot more people are thinking about it. I think a lot more people are starting to ask how are they going to set themselves up for success in an environment where maybe the social. Oh, I've disappeared from the screen. Okay, I'm not sure if I'm still here anymore, but I don't think it is too early. Neutral Rockets. Okay, guys, we seem to be experiencing some technical issues, so if there's one here. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope this has been a useful episode. Let me know in the chat if it has been useful. Give me a thumbs up. Let me know if this has been useful to you guys. We've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about retirement, how to think about it, how to think about using your real estate in retirement, how to plan for a point of going into retirement, how to best kind of work with CGT, so many different things. So hopefully this was useful. If there's more that you guys want to chat about, hit us up in the community. And remember, the community is not just about Gabby and I, but we are in there. So if you ask great questions in the community, you're going to get some great answers. And I've been loving watching the community grow, particularly over the last couple of weeks, seeing more and more people sharing insights with each other, helping each other. And even in the chat here today on the live, I've seen a lot of people sharing ideas and saying, hey, try this. And I've done this and done this. That is what we are trying to do, is we're trying to build a community where everyone can help everyone grow and prosper and create a life of freedom, choice, and abundance. So love seeing you guys do that. And we're just here to support you and help to shine a light in some of those areas to help you guys create that life. Let's leave it there for now. Thank you so much. Take care. See you in the next episode. By the way, we'll be doing Wednesday again next week. So if you're in the community, you will know about that. But we'll see you then. Bye for now.